myself that maybe I could deliver a workshop, maybe that I could give a talk. And I went through lots of years, many years of thinking I would remain in the background and I don't really know anything. I don't know as much as these people on these topics, but really soaking everything up and absorbing it until things just sort of started to slot into place a few years ago, really. And I was born in Wales. My parents are Welsh. All my sort of descendants, they're my ancestors, not my descendant. My ancestors are Welsh. And looking back, I left Wales when I was 3, and for some unknown reason, I guess it happens to people quite often in midlife, is I started to reflect on my Welsh roots, and I started looking up on the internet about Celtic studies, different things. And bizarrely at that point as well, do not ask me why, it's one of these mad things, but I just had this real desire to go and have a day working with birds of prey. So as you do, put this into Google, birds of prey, Celtic, and something mad comes up. And then I embarked on this, because I generally say yes to most things. Celtic, British Celtic native shamanism. And I embarked on this 1-year course with this lady, and it was totally mad at the time. And I think she kind of thought that you should be able to do these things naturally, like ask nature a question and be able to distinguish what the answer is. So rather than thinking it's yourself giving the answer, can nature provide us with answers to some of our questions, and some of the biggest questions of all time? And nowadays that sounds like quite a bizarre thing, but up until 10,000 years ago, when we became, we moved from being hunter-gatherers into arable farming, that's what we used to do. Nature was our guru, was our god. And we've moved so far away from that in the last 10,000 years. But this course was teaching me to get back to that and reconnecting not only with my Celtic roots, but with kind of my roots of growing up, really, which was I spent a great deal of time outdoors, playing in streams, and just always on my bike outdoors with friends. And you kind of move away from that when you get to your teenage years. And I moved to London and worked abroad for a bit. But I feel like I've been reconnecting with the natural environment. And along with doing that, I realized that the other missing piece of the jigsaw for myself, and maybe for all of us, is connecting back to ourselves. And that took me back to a path that I'd started 15 years ago, which was working with the breath. And so those are a few things that you've touched on there. It was the nature connection when you and I met, but also recently we went for a walk together and I took you to some woods. And also we've had a breath session together. Yeah. And now I find myself 2 years later being a certified forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku guide. And I've just recently qualified as a breath coach with a man called Alan Dolan, who runs a breath coaching business called The Breath Guru, who was one of the sort of first founders or introducers of the idea of breath work aside from or outside of yoga in the UK. So quite a lot has happened, actually, and particularly over the last 2 years, to bring me from working in an office in Battersea to being where I am now, which is just sort of setting out my stall for being a breath coach and a forest bathing guide. So a lot has happened, and there's a lot of what next, but and I kind of contemplating it last night, I feel like I've literally thrown everything up in the air, all the things that I've ever done, all the skills that I've ever gained, and all the people that have ever helped me. I feel that that's literally juggling with it, throwing it all up in the air and seeing what lands. And the things that have landed are very much the connection to nature and the connection to the self through the breath work.
Yeah. At the weekend, I've been helping somebody for a few weeks look to buy a new car. It was the first new car they'd bought in 17 years. So we went to drop off the old car, which is basically a give the keys to charity kind of car, and pick up the newer car. And I said, take a picture standing between both cars. And they did, and they sent it to their family and stuff afterwards. But I had to push them into it by saying, I believe in taking transitions and taking endings seriously and taking transitions seriously and marking them. And one of my favorite of 1,300 plus blogs I've written is about taking endings seriously. And it refers to the captain of the Barcelona football team and how he just sat on the pitch with his bare feet after the game once the crowd had left, and the assembled media. He spent his whole career there, nearly 20 years. The assembled media just left him on his own. And they left him there for like 45 minutes to an hour. He just sat there on the grass, marking the moment. And the book that you sent me your chapter of was your story was The Risks and Rewards of a Curious Life. And it's the book. What's the book called again?
Book is here. I Am Every Woman.
I Am Every Woman. And it's stories of 15 women. And in reading this about you, or reading your story, what was fascinating is that you documented your life's journey. And then you kind of, you really just did a biography to some extent. And coming out of it, there were two thoughts that I liked, which link into what you're talking about at this point, because you've been talking about how things led you to a point where really for 7 years you've just been exploring, and then you've thrown them up in the air, and now you've seen what's landed. So it's a pretty exciting point in time now. Yeah. But the two things were, you seem to say yes to a lot of things. So perhaps there's a lesson in there for people who, there are people who don't say yes until they know everything can work right. And there are people, and there's lots of reasons why they'll say no. And sometimes they don't always have a lot to do with whether or not it would work. But you say yes to things. And what was the other one that was a piece of language from Elizabeth Gilbert around people being either sledgehammers that just crash through and are outcome oriented, which I imagine when you were CEO, when I did a CEO role, that, we do a lot of that. But I think a commonality you and I both have is we'll have wide-ranging conversations over coffee for hours. And the other language was a hummingbird that flits from thing to thing. Yeah. So I guess you're saying yes to a lot. You've now landed on two things. Yeah. Where does that put you in terms of an Elizabeth Gilbert persona now? Are you going to keep saying yes to things, or are you going to go, actually, I'm going to build something now?
Yeah. The story with Elizabeth Gilbert, so it's two birds, so it's a jackhammer and a hummingbird. And I was always very admiring of people who knew what they wanted to do. So they were, right, I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to be a solicitor. I've always wanted to be a lawyer. What was it that you wanted to be when you were younger? And when people ask me that question, I'm like, and I honestly only remember that I wanted to be an astronaut. And I don't know for how long that was. And I'm sure everybody, well, certainly not little girls, but certainly a lot of little boys might have said they wanted to be astronauts. But I never really knew. And I feel like my career has been that. And I always felt it a bit of a, not a failure as such, but maybe that I, like we all do, maybe I could have been better, or I wish that I knew, particularly in the last 7 years, having left, I wish I knew what I wanted to do. And there's been a lot of soul searching. But in writing a chapter of that book, and before the book what led to the book was a series of interviews by a lady called Claudia Roth. And I suppose at that point, I don't know if anything else led to that, but me starting to look back and think, what have I done? And then I listened to that. It just happened to pop up one day, Elizabeth Gilbert doing a talk for Oprah Winfrey show, I think, and talking about jackhammers and hummingbirds. And the jackhammer knows what they want to do, and they're quite fixed in their approach. And she considered herself a jackhammer. And that was the people that I'd always admired. But then there were other people, and these people she considered to be hummingbirds, and that the hummingbirds go from field to field, collecting pollen from here and pollen from there and moving on. And what I say in the book, and the little line that we all have a little quote from it, is that, I realized that there were other people like me, and actually she was making them sound quite good. And the quote is, I felt altogether more normal. And in fact, Elizabeth Gilbert says, she would love to have been a hummingbird. And of course, when we're on one side of the coin, we want to be the other, and vice versa. But actually, when I look back, I'm really pleased. And I don't know if anyone listening to this has ever done any kind of shamanic or dream work, you call it really. It's when you go on a journey. It's a bit like a meditation or imagination exercise. And I got led on one day, a sort of a dream journey, if you like. And part of that was I imagined being in a cave at one point, and on the sides of the dark cave, it was a journey. So there was no point of this cave where I could move forward. The only place that I realized that I could move was upwards. And I could see these eyes from this cave. And this sounds quite scary, but it wasn't scary at all. And when I looked at these eyes sort of shining brightly out from the cave, what I realized is there were also these arms kind of lifting me up and showing me, you need to go up. And then as I moved up, what I realized looking back was all these arms and these eyes were from people that I knew and that had been in my life. And I've always really loved, and I don't know what the exact phrase is, but I don't even remember who said it, but in terms of business, there's no such thing as a self-made millionaire. In fact, I heard it from Benjamin Hardy. I don't know if you know him, but there's no such thing as a self-made millionaire. And you can apply that to life as well. There's no such thing as you having got somewhere on your own. You are the sum of all the people that have ever been in your life, the ones that you think have had a positive effect, but as much, and sometimes even more so, the ones that you deem have had a negative effect, because quite often they're the people that you learn the most from. And these arms and eyes were from all the people that had ever contributed something to my life, and they were supporting me upwards in the cave. And then I got to the next part of the journey, and this case maybe sounds totally mad to some of you, but anyway, consider it was a dream. And in this dream, there was a big cauldron, a big pot, and I was encouraged to come over and stir this big pot, which had this sort of gloopy red liquid in it. And then the red liquid came up out of the stirrer and kind of came up over me and just covered me from head to foot. But it wasn't suffocating. It was, I kind of was then sort of breaking out from it. And the guy that was leading me through this journey said, "How does it feel?" And I said, "Well, it feels like a rebirthing." And I was quite traumatized. It's for another time, that journey and where it took place, but it was in the middle of a dark field by a long barrow, which is an ancient burial ground. And I was quite terrified. I was quite terrified at the time. But this journey stuck with me. It was quite amazing. And I realized that's kind of what's happened, really, is where I am now is the sum of all the things that I've ever done. And if I hadn't been a hummingbird, which most of my life I've kind of sort of felt negatively towards, then I wouldn't be where I was now. And I'm not saying that I'm something glorious or something amazing, but I'm quite happy with where I am, and I'm quite excited, even though it's been uncertain and I've not quite known where I was going. Sometimes it's starting to make sense to me, and writing it down in a book or talking about it in something like this helps you to look back. And in fact, the book that we've written is about encouraging, is specifically for women, this one, but it applies to anyone, is encouraging people to write their own stories. And this is like 3,000 words. I mean, it's quite hard to get your life into 3,000 words. Some people are focused on one particular area, but it's really, really cathartic, and it helps you make sense of what's gone on.
I think what I pick up from you in sharing the last piece was being without judgment. when you take those two roles, and I self-referenced a bit as I heard you say something about, with the sum total of all the people that have been in our life, but also the sort of hummingbird and jackhammer kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you might think, well, you've been hummingbird all the time, but then without that, you wouldn't be in the position you're in now, where you can focus on what you're focusing on. And the journey that you had and doing a lot of travel, which you wrote in that sort of 3,000 words kind of autobiographical piece, which is very cool to read today. You'd not been in the travel or events or anything like that, experiences, you wouldn't have been in that if you hadn't done all of that. And I self-referenced by going, I was totally the jackhammer. When I was 16, I knew I wanted to be the chartered accountant, the finance director, and then the CEO of a FTSE 100 company before I was 40. Boom.
Yeah.
So it wasn't exactly what I did, but I wasn't too far off that kind of, box ticking by the time I hit 40. And then I kind of looked and went, okay, now what? So I've gone from being a jackhammer, but my natural sense is to be much more the hummingbird.
Yeah. That happens to a lot of people in life, doesn't it? And at least you were courageous to change. It applies not just to careers, it applies to marriages, it applies to relationships, marriages. It applies to lots of things. Or being in a house that actually you just put up with, but actually it doesn't fill you with joy. It really applies to every area. And sometimes it takes courage to step out of that. And the fact that you did, but some people who've done a lot of training, doctors, I'm sure your training was long as well, but doctors, architects, well, they spend 6-7 years, sometimes more doing training. So to step out of that, or to acknowledge that actually they're not happy. I hear of a lot of people that are trained in law actually, and then find themselves going, do you know what, this isn't for me. And they're kind of 6 years down the line with their training, but are brave enough to go, do you know what, that isn't for me.
I've actually developed over time, by sheer referral, a niche in coaching lawyers as they become partners and then get told, right, go build your practice, because they don't really get a lot of help. And they're often high achievers in their mid-30s.
Yeah.
And many of them will say, oh, I don't really like what I'm doing. I did it because I was good at it. And, people say, go do a law degree, be a lawyer.
Yeah.
And they're making a lot of money, but they're not terribly happy. But one of the things I go is like, you wouldn't have done this for 15 years if there wasn't something about it you love.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just can reconnect them to that. So for me, being self-reflective wasn't a really polar thing about, I didn't really like being the jackhammer, I really had to change. Yeah. It was more that also enabled me to be in a position where I could, because there's not many people in a position where they're fortunate enough at my age to be able to just say, hey, what do I want to do now? Realizing that we're talking for quite a while, we could talk for hours about the forest bathing and the breath work. But what I can say is that the breath work, you pivoted this to do it online. All right. Yes. Mm-hmm. And even though at the time we decided to do this, and it was part of your training in it to do it for a lot of people. It's really extensive breadth and depth and width of training.
Yeah.
You had to, I was one of the people that did this with you. But we realized at the time that because of the lockdown rules, even though we only live about, X number of kilometers apart, it's we had to do it. We had to do it online anyway.
Yeah.
And it was, but what I can tell you is I felt that had as near to 100% of the value as it would have done in person. All right. So that's a really fantastic experience. And one of the things about these conversations, when people watch them later or listen to them on podcast, is that they get an experience of the guest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really quite cool, because a number of the guests have, this is a space for them to talk about whatever they want and ping it out to their networks and et cetera. And I was talking to a past guest from last year, the other week. They're saying people have just found it, what they talked about, because there's a fairly good organic search rate on my site with the amount of content on there. Yeah. And they said, and they wanted to talk to me once they listened to me speak. So I get the feeling that there is, if people are in range of coming up to some of the things you're doing, and you're running events,
Yeah.
But they can work with you individually. They can bring corporate groups. They can do all kinds of other things. How do they? What are the core things that you're now putting out into the world for people to look at, and where do people find them?
Yeah, so the core focus really is the breathwork and the Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing or nature connection. And what I'm doing through my business, The Life Adventure, is I'm with a friend who actually I worked with 20 years ago, who's an author, and she's done a one-woman show, and she's done a lot of leadership coaching and training. We're running retreats this summer in Surrey and in Wiltshire and in Hampshire, which are for corporates. And it's an exclusive glamping site. And glamping, you kind of like have that word of, oh, what's that? Well, it's quite amazing. So each site is for 20 people exclusively, but some corporates may only want 10 people. And they're in these luxury bell tents with wood burning stoves, proper beds. And they have the site exclusively, their own chef, who will cook breakfast. You can have breakfast outside. The one in Surrey, for example, looks over the Surrey hills. You can watch the sunrise and the sunset from the field that you're in. And then long tables, and then there's one giant teepee where we can run some of the workshops and events in there if the weather isn't so good. And we take people through predominantly a 36-hour program, but we've got some companies coming for maybe month-long, and they're just switching people in and out. And we'll be running them through various experiences, connecting them to themselves and nature. So they'll be having a forest bathing experience. They'll be having a conscious connected breath session. They'll be doing vision building with Preeti and also storytelling. So retelling your story or telling a new story for a new era. Everything is sort of based around the fact of re-energizing yourself, reimagining a new future post-COVID, but also just generally what's happening in the world and the amount of change, and doing all that in just a stunning environment where they'll wake up feeling fully refreshed because they haven't slept on the floor on a grotty camp bed. And just not only that, they're just going to be together and reconnecting as a team out in nature, which I just think is the most, I'm really a fan of it. It's kind of bringing everything together that I could have possibly dreamed of in one package. So we've got a feature running in the Telegraph this weekend on it. And then I think we've just arranging for an FT journalist to come along. We featured in City Wealth magazine online publication last week, and it was the most read article of the week.
Cool.
So it really seems to be, I'm certain of it, it's of the zeitgeist, and it's it's really something that people need. I'm not at a point in my life where I want to be offering people something because I want to make a business out of it. I want to be providing something that provides real value. And so I'm really excited about this. And this is the first year, but it's at least a 5-year program. And really excited about that. So, and outside of that, I'll be doing breath sessions for people on a one-to-one basis, or taking them forest bathing. So the Life Adventure is the business where they can find me, or the breath business is called Wonder Breath. And the forest bathing is Forest Bathing Made in Britain. So those are the places where people can find me, or they can reach out to you. But I'd be delighted, even if they want taster sessions, if they like the idea of the retreat, the corporate retreats, we're doing taster days. So plenty of touch points for people.
Very, very cool. Just highlight one is the idea of campfires.
I love a fire. There'll be lots of those on the side.
I have done countless off-site. It's interesting. In Britain, they tend to call them off-sites. In America, they call them retreats.
Yes.
When you say retreat here, they don't think of it as business. And over there, they do. But I was just doing one the other weekend, but it was on Zoom in Canada.
Yeah.
Hopefully next year it's in person.
Yeah.
And on a cyclical fashion, when you've been with a company for years and you come in once a year as their facilitator, guide, whatever you want to call it, they get, sometimes they're, what are we going to do this year? Other times you get to blue sky and you get to really play.
Yeah.
There's a charity I worked with a few weeks ago that has scaled up 5 times in the last 3 years, most of which was during COVID. and a medical charity on a life shortening disease to do with the lungs.
Right.
So you can imagine the COVID times.
Yeah.
But it was amazing to do. And now realizing, well, at scale, this year was what are we going to do? Yeah. Next year is what's the vision? And I really would love to get them out of a hotel meeting room.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it's been sit by a campfire and retell the story. Where did we start? Yeah. Go back to the past, come back to the present, and then go into the future. But literally telling stories around a campfire is one of the most powerful things. You know, so
because the whole thing for corporates started however many years ago is bring your whole self to work, and that has really changed since COVID, because you're seeing people, you know, we've had countless conversations about this, I'm sure all of us, but seeing people in their actual environment, I just think is lovely. You know, if I phone Lloyd's Bank and I know that I'm speaking to someone from their lounge, I don't know, it just makes it more connected, really. And if you're bringing people around a campfire, or waking up in the most incredible surroundings, that's a whole other level again. And you really, and you know, we know it ourselves from the, you know, where we first met up a mountain, is it just encourages creativity like you wouldn't believe, and also connection. I mean, we're working now, hopefully they're going to be coming along, they're coming for a taster day, but one of the largest social media organizations in the world is has grown a bit like you were saying about the charity, but literally over the last year and a half since COVID have doubled in size. Half those teams haven't met each other, so we're in discussions with them about coming along for, you know, an extended period of time, maybe a month, where they swap people in and out, but people get to meet each other on a whole different level altogether. But not only that, we're teaching them how to reconnect to nature, reconnect to themselves, and reconnect to each other in that environment. And really, I couldn't think of anything better.
Brilliant. Well, being observant, recognizing that unlike any of my guests, we've gone way over the time. Sorry. But what I didn't want to tell you while you were talking is that we'd had a bit of I've never had it before, a clunk in the YouTube interface when we started.
Yes.
I thought I'd addressed it. And then I realized as you were really talking through your history, that it hadn't, the actual video recording hadn't started for quite some time. So don't panic when you actually see that the video recording on the page won't have the first X number of minutes in it, because the audio podcast will do, and it will have a bonus 10 minutes on the end. So if people want to, if they check the video, they can go, what was going on at the beginning there? She seemed to launch into midstream and go, well, you need to listen to the audio. And I actually will get my webmaster to put a note there saying the video recording started late. So if you want the full recording, listen to the podcast. But it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you talk through how you got to, a little bit of how you got to where you are, but the 3,000 words you wrote in the book. Remind me of the title of the book again.
I Am Every Woman.
I Am Every Woman. And it's on Amazon now.
Yeah.
And because people may not have, they may have listened to all of this, but not watched the video, but not seen the beginning. My guest has been Justine Clement, who can most readily be found at The Life Adventure.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
And would you like a last word or a last thought from this?
Well, really, it's probably one from the book, which is really just about having the courage to say yes. I feel that that's my message at the moment to anyone, is you're feeling a bit stuck or a bit unsure, and opportunities come your way, but you're too scared to take them. Just say yes, because you never know where the path will take you.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you, Tom.